Welcome to the Kaiser Report. I'm Max Kaiser. Some say it was Albert Einstein who defined insanity as doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. If that's an accurate definition, then many economists across the Western world are truly bonkers. When one interest rate cut fails, try another. When $1 trillion in bad debts transferred to the central bank balance sheet fails to revive the economy, try $2 trillion. When money fails to flow from the board of private bank and corporate balance sheets, give them more money. When debt starts to fail, double the debt load. Yes, we're truly insane. So why not try something new? Over the next few episodes, we're going to speak to guests about some new ideas that might not normally be considered, but we're no longer in normal times. Stacey.
Yes, we're going to look at some winter why-nots. Why not try some radical ideas? Now, across Europe, actually, we've seen over the past year, in 2015, we saw the trying to get rid of decades-old parties or duopolies that ran economies and countries. In Greece, we saw the introduction of Syriza. They came out of nowhere and then won the election, and they now run the government. In Spain, we've seen Ciudadanos, and we now saw Podemos. So this is a sort of winter why not? Why not try new parties, for example?
Absolutely. There's a growing insurgency around the world, politically speaking, and financially speaking. We saw incredible disruption in what is called fintech. So 100,000 bankers lost their job over the past year due to financial technology innovations, principally Bitcoin and blockchain.
We also saw at the end of the year, we saw a lot of things suddenly changing. We saw the Cuban relationships thaw with the U.S. You know, the U.S. is suddenly bringing them in from the cold. Same with Iran. We saw a decades-old oil export ban in the United States overturned. So now America can now export oil, which was bizarre that over the, you know, the conversation always is that America is bringing democracy and free markets to the world. But nobody ever noticed that for the past 40 years, there's been a ban on oil exports from the country, which is the opposite of a free market. But I want to look at one of the other big stories of 2015 has been fracking. And the story combines a lot of the issues that we talk about, especially relating to central banks and moral hazard and misallocation of capital. Time is running out on U.S. frackers. Now, it's a big, long story, but I'm only going to concentrate on one paragraph here because it's quite remarkable. In the second quarter of 2015, 83% of U.S. onshore oil producers' operating cash flow was used for debt servicing, according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, about twice the level of early 2012. So 83% of all their cash flow went to just servicing debt. And that was in the second quarter of 2015. Oil prices have since fallen. Lord knows, I'm assuming that at least 100% now is going towards servicing this debt. So this is it's an example of our economies everywhere you look is servicing that debt flow, and even at these low prices and even with all this free money, they've been spending all that cash flow to pay the debt.
Fracking is completely uneconomic. They borrow money for, let's say, by floating a bond that might mature in 20 years or 25 years, but the fracking well is exhausted after 3 or 4 years. So you've got all that debt that has to go bankrupt, and the state ends up bailing out these corporations in one way or another. And in the UK, which now has over 1.5 trillion pounds in debt, the state will be asked to bail out the frackers that are now moving into these state parks in the UK.
That brings me to another issue about this. I mentioned that the moral hazard and the misallocation of capital, but there's also been an overturn of democracy, because in Denton, Texas, for example, they introduced the citizens voted for a ban on fracking. The state legislature then it passed a law saying you can't ban fracking. Here, the population expressed dissatisfaction. They don't want fracking. And on Friday afternoon, after everybody then had gone on their Christmas vacations, the conservative government introduced that we could explore for fracking all over the state parks. Fracking under national parks backed by MPs. MPs have voted to allow fracking for shale gas 1,200 meters below national parks and other protected sites. So they introduced these regulations despite the population not wanting it.
1.5 trillion pounds in debt in the UK. These busted fracking rigs will add a minimum of 100 billion more debt to the national debt in the UK. And the energy extracted from these fracking rigs is nowhere near the energy required to explore and extract the energy. So you have a net energy loser, you have a net capital loser, it's a debt increaser, and it's an ecological holocaust provoker.
And of course, it also causes toxic ingredients in your water supply.
Right, but it makes a lot of people fees.
Yeah.
Bankers and fracking companies make the fees, which they then, send offshore somewhere.
And also the government dumped, and of course here the population still enjoys that two-party duopoly and their monarchy. So they haven't turned to alternative. They don't have why not? Why not try a different system?
Right, even though many places are now totally running on renewable energies. Are we going to throw to our little Patrick Byrne
We're going to
piece?
throw to that, but I first want to say another story dumped regarding to the fracking. UK solar panel subsidy cuts, branded huge and misguided. Conservative government cuts financial aid by 65%, despite its own review showing the move puts 18,700 jobs at risk. So again, the government is doing everything that the population doesn't want.
All right, well, speaking of winter why nots, Patrick Byrne is an innovator and a corporate titan. We have a little bit more to speak with Patrick Byrne about. Let's throw to that now.
Bitcoin is it.
Patrick, let me ask you this. What was your moment when you saw the light and the penny dropped and you were like, oh my God, this Bitcoin thing really is cool and you want to get all over it? What happened? When did it happen? And what was the sequence, if you will? What was that moment of clarity?
Give it to you real quick. First, years ago, I did a doctorate at Stanford, which included computation theory, the math underlying cryptography. So a few years when I read about Bitcoin in I think Wired or Fast Company, I read a couple paragraphs and I knew, oh, this is based on that stuff I studied 25 years ago. So I was sort of attuned to it anyway. In December of 2013, I just mentioned offhand to a reporter who said, are you going to do Bitcoin? And I said, yeah, we'll probably get around to it next year on the theory that nothing's too hard when you don't have to do it yourself. Well, I just mentioned it to a reporter and suddenly it was in blogs in South Korea and India and such. So we hopped on it, accepted Bitcoin. No other company of $1 million accepted it. We took it. We were $1.5 billion. So I think I like to think that we accelerated the crypto revolution by about 4 or 5 years. But then in the spring of 2013, I got working on the Wall Street applications of Bitcoin. And I was actually over in Amsterdam giving the keynote in May of a year and a half ago, giving the keynote at the first global conference on Bitcoin. If you go to YouTube and look up my name, Amsterdam, you'll see one of the best speeches of my life. Everyone expected me to talk about Bitcoin. I got up and talked about, look, the blockchain is going to disrupt civilization as we know it. I unlike Al Gore, I wasn't here quite for the beginning of the internet, but I was pretty close, and we knew we were doing something like the Gutenberg Bible. But those of us who are involved in the crypto revolution understand this is going to be bigger than the internet. So it's actually, I think the title of that speech in Amsterdam was 500 Years of Liberalism from Amsterdam to Bitcoin. Because to me, this is the great trump card of liberalism against the voices of authority, who of course like centralized institutions that they can use to oppress people and that the oligarchs can capture and use to extract value from the rest of us. So this has a revolutionary political potential.
Yeah, also as an entrepreneur, Patrick, you are a guy who would not go quietly into that good night and accept some of these Wall Street tricks. And when this Bitcoin came around, and instantly, when I heard that Patrick Byrne was into Bitcoin, I'm like, uh-oh. The Reg Show guy? Uh-oh. This fireworks are coming, because I knew you'd be motivated on this because it solved a lot of these problems that we were documenting and we were really crying about. And I'm like, this is fantastic. So as an entrepreneur, do you feel vindicated that you stayed true to your vision and then the world moved and caught up to your vision? Your thoughts?
Well, great question, and it is you and I are some of the few people in the world who would see those connections between what happened 10 years ago and what I'm doing now. I love watching your show, Max. You're a deep thinker. Yeah, I guess I feel vindicated isn't something that even gets to me. I hate to sound, I always knew I was right. I had the data, I had the facts. I knew I was right. So I don't have any sense of vindication. Can I tell you a quick Zen story, or doesn't Zen fit on your show?
Oh, it fits perfectly. Okay,
quick Zen story. This Zen Buddhist monk loves being a monk in this little village. A local girl gets pregnant. She said, the family says, who did it? She says, the monk. The townspeople come and say, "You horrible man, we trusted you around our daughters." The monk says, "Ah, is that so?" He leaves being a monk, takes the baby, raises the baby. All along, the villagers, whenever they see him, say, "Ah, you horrible man, we'll never forget what you did." And he says, "Ah, is that so?" Years later, the woman comes, takes the baby back, runs off with another man, and explains he was the father all along, and she had to accuse the monk because she knew he would do the right thing. And the villagers come and say, "Ah, we're so sorry. How could we have ever said those things? We're so sorry." And the monk says, "Ah, is that so?" That's how it's not about vindication. My answer to all these people who are now getting the joke is, all the Wall Street types who are wanting to say, who are telling me, "Man, you turned out to be right," and all that stuff. It's, that's so.
Well, I know that, well, okay, fair enough. Now, let me just change gears here for a second, because, correct me if I'm wrong, I may have not heard this story correctly, but am I correct in saying that you have kind of stockpiled some silver, I think, in case of a financial break, and so you would be able to pay your employees, is that correct?
Yeah, silver and gold, about $10 million, and food. I'm a fan, besides of you, of Nassim Taleb. I like robust systems. I don't like fragile systems. We've set our company up so that if the banking system shut down for, say, 30 to 60 days, we could actually keep everyone employed. We can pay everybody, be gold and silver coins, keep them fed. If zombies walk the earth, there's nothing I can do for my 2,000 colleagues. But we can survive a 2-week to, let's say, even 8 to 10 week shutdown of the entire system.
Well, the next poll that comes out, who is the best employer in America? It could very well be Overstock.com under that scenario. Patrick Byrne, thanks so much for being with us today, and great Godspeed and good luck with all your adventures.
Thank you, Max.
Stay tuned for the second half, for the first of our Winter Why Not series. Welcome back to the Kaiser Report special Winter Why Not. In this segment, we ask Scott Santens, why not basic income? Scott, welcome to the Kaiser Report.
Thanks for having me, Max.
All right, Scott, you've been writing about basic income for a long time. Now, it looks like Finland is going to be the first to actually do it. So what's going on in Finland? What is basic income? How does it work?
Yeah, so there's a lot of interest in Finland right now, and they are on the verge of enacting a €800 per month basic income. Possibly the plan will be fully planned out next November. And they're also going to start with kind of a pilot project at about €550 per month, and this will be in addition to existing benefits that they have right now.
Right.
But their goal is to simplify.
Right. Now, why Finland? What was the first country to take this up, do you think? Because I think it caught a lot of people by surprise. A lot of countries are talking about this. I think Switzerland just had this idea. They had a referendum. They voted it down. What's going on in Finland? Why Finland?
Well, okay, so first of all, Switzerland is actually, they're still going to do this. They're going to vote on it next year. Actually, they could vote on it as early as the summertime, but most likely later in the year. But they still have yet to vote on it. There's kind of some mixed messaging out there with confusion about how they voted down the minimum wage, and people think that that's kind of the same thing. But it's the Switzerland could actually still do this.
Okay.
So they really brought it to the fore, I believe. And so Finland, it's because Switzerland led the way. They're like, well, wait a second, we can do this too.
Right. Now, in one way, it's a dismantling of or disintermediation of the welfare state in that it removes the need for vast bureaucracies overseeing the dozens or even hundreds of different programs. Do you see it this way?
Oh yes, that's exactly one of the ways to look at this, and one of the great reasons for it. Because really, not only is it costly to do our existing programs, but there's obviously a lot of errors. There's a lot of people who should get assistance but don't. There's also, as we go towards this greater precariat society of jobs that are no longer full-time for decades at a time, but actually maybe a few years here, maybe part-time, 0-hour contracts, gig labor, this kind of thing. It just makes more sense to make the to make the assistance program more flexible and more able to handle this stuff without all of this bureaucracy, because we're just going to need more and more bureaucracy as time goes on, and that doesn't make any sense. We can just simplify it.
When did you first become interested in this concept, and what got you interested in this concept to begin with?
Yeah, I'm a big Redditor. I've been on Reddit for years, and there was a post that made the front page of Reddit back in later fall 2013, and it was really the conversation was about just how quickly technology is advancing and how people just aren't prepared for it. And I've always been big into technology, and I was actually surprised by this myself and just some of the things that I read during this conversation. And it just got me thinking, like, wait a second, if we're not ready for this, how can we prepare? And this got me reading into basic income, and I realized that this isn't actually only just about avoiding kind of a dystopian future, but it's actually about like laying the groundwork for a much better future that just makes a whole lot more sense, that can actually create a better society just from no poverty, increased innovation, better economic growth, sustainability. There's just a whole lot of reasons to support this idea, and the more I read about it, the more I feel the greater I feel it's more important that it is.
Right. Well, you mentioned automation there and technology and how that's affecting the workplace. I know one of the current developments that have really set alarm bells going are the self-driving cars and trucks, because in America, truck drivers are self-employed, and there are thousands, tens of thousands of truck drivers. It's, I think, in the top three of jobs available for essentially unskilled or partially skilled labor. And with self-driving trucks now, suddenly a huge number of people could be out of work. And so the urgency for something like this, basic income, is raised. Now, let's talk about the nitty-gritty of the economics of it. So how does a country pay for basic income?
Yeah, so there are a lot of ways to pay for it. And you can see actually just from this conversation about Finland, how they're talking about how it'll cost as much as the government already raises and stuff. But like you can think about it that way, but it's like saying that you're going to buy a $300,000 house without talking about the fact that you own a $150,000 house that you can sell, and you're obviously going to sell to move into the new one. Like we can actually eliminate a bunch of costs that we are already using. So it's not that, like in the U.S., I've estimated that it'll cost a total of about $3 trillion of revenue that's required. But we're already raising about half that. So really the additional amount is about $1.5 trillion here in the US. So the same thing goes in any country. It depends on how much you're already spending and how much you can eliminate. And another way to look at this too is you can actually save more money than we're spending through the costs that we're not looking at as costs. So when I say that, I mean like eliminating the costs of crime, which is estimated in the US at being over $1 trillion a year. Eliminating the costs of child poverty, and reducing making a healthier population that reduces the need for hospitalization, healthcare, and all these things that are very expensive. So with a basic income, you can actually negate these costs that are so expensive. So aside from that, when you're looking at, well, how do we fund this? There's actually, you can look at value-added taxes. You can look to a switch to flat taxes. You can look at financial transaction taxes. You can look at carbon taxes. You can even look at how we go about creating new money itself. As in, this is it's called seniorage. So instead, we could actually just have citizen seniorage instead of letting banks create new money, but just letting money be created in the hands of people. There's a whole lot of ways of going about this. And it's really just up to the country that chooses how they want to design this, what combination of programs they wanted to use, or even just one way to go about it.
Okay, now in Europe, many countries are trying to prevent newcomers from claiming benefits. And so who qualifies for basic income in your view? In other words, you have people moving around. How do you see that, Scott?
Yeah, in my view, I think just as a matter of functionality, that you need to start with a citizen. It's basically a citizen dividend. You're saying that if you are a citizen of this country, then you get this income for being a citizen. So when it comes to fears of like immigration and stuff, it actually encourages immigrants to actually go the legal route because they want to get documented and they want to go through that process in order to eventually get a basic income. Whereas right now you don't need to do that, and really like immigrants come in and you can actually just get a job outside of these benefit programs. You're really just looking for an income through labor, and you can do this. So this is actually a way of encouraging documentation.
Now, basic income has already been tried, or trialed, I should say, in various locations throughout the world. So what have been the results, positive and negative, so far, Scott?
Oh, yeah. So there have been some really interesting basic income pilots that took place in both Namibia and India. And these were universal basic income pilots where an entire population, like a village, got an amount. So like say in Namibia, it was about 1,000 people. And in India, this is across a few villages, about 6,000 people. And the really interesting effects of this, I feel, is that there was a great deal more entrepreneurship, self-employment. In Namibia, entrepreneurship, self-employment went up 301%. And in India, you're looking at a third of these started up their own businesses. And this seems to be a common element, is that having an income unconditionally actually encourages people and allows people to pursue what they wish to pursue. And just imagine it's kind of like a capital for the people kind of thing. Like you can actually, people need some starting capital in order to do things. So they can actually use this money and actually start up businesses. And then of course, the other effect of this is you actually see the businesses that exist and the new businesses be raised up and enabled by the consumption possible thanks to all these people having this additional income.
Right. Well, I mean, harkening back to the days of earliest humankind, there was the concept of the village or the group of people that would be self-sustaining. In other words, everyone is mindful of each other's needs, and the unit as such would generate its own caretaking because everyone was a generalist. Everyone could do anything. And so you had a certain amount of self-sufficiency, but only after years and years of specialization do we have now a situation where somebody who can do brain surgery might be making an enormous amount of money at the very top, or a financial derivatives trader, and then you have a lot of people at the bottom who are just completely cut off from society utterly. And the growing chasm between these two extremes are where our values as humans and as a society seem to be falling. So is that a fair characterization where basic income kind of brings us full circle to the point where we can, as humans, are back to living together in more of a harmonious way where people's actual spiritual needs and needs to fulfill themselves are addressed in a very in a practical way? Your thoughts?
Yeah, so I wrote an article recently called "Basic Income Increases Social Cohesion," and this is an effect of basic income, is that you do increase social cohesion. Like it's like one of the effects in India was that you have these different castes that might not necessarily work together or come together, and they actually in the village pilots they showed that they actually did come together and they talked things out and they worked on things as a group, and this was kind of surprising and unheard of. There was a very not something that they thought would actually happen. And you actually, in basic income-like experiments as well, just giving cash transfers, you see that that people actually do share their expenses more and work together more, and they're actually less likely to be offended by each other, which is an interesting outcome as well.
Right.
Yeah,
what about the potential in various examples? Are there distinct groups that end up being losers? People who are disabled, unable to work, et cetera. Is there any, have you noticed in these various examples, are there some that, at this stage of development where you see just kind of hard-coded losers in this paradigm?
Yes, there was definitely a loser that I've found so far, and that's moneylenders. So one of the effects of basic income is that people they pay down their debts and they actually take on less debt and they build savings. And so because of this, those who focus on, especially on giving like high interest loans, so you say like your payday loan kind of places.
Well, we get rid of the payday lenders as well. We get rid of the payday lenders as well. That's fantastic. All right, Scott, we're out of time. Thanks for being on this special edition of Kaiser Report Winter Why Not series.
Thank you.
That's it for this first edition of the Kaiser Report Winter Why Not series with me, Max Kaiser, and Stacy Herbert. I'd like to thank our guest, Scott Santens, a basic income advocate. If you'd like to respond to this why not, then why not leave a comment below the YouTube version of this show or send us a tweet at Kaiser Report. Until next time, bye, y'all.